A warm greetings to all. I am Mrs. Pichabharti, working as an assistant professor in Department of Medical Surgical Nursing in Sri Balaji College of Nursing. Today, we are going to discuss about head injury. This particular topic will come under Medical Surgical Nursing 2 under Neurological Nursing. Today, we will discuss about the head injury. So, head injury is any degree of injury to the head ranging from the scalp laceration to loss of consciousness to focal neurological deficit is called as head injury. Traumatic brain injury, in short, we call it as TBI, is a non-degenerative, non-congenital insult to the brain from an external mechanical force, possibly leading to permanent or temporary impairment of cognitive, physical, and psychosocial functions, with an associated diminished or altered state of consciousness is called as traumatic brain injury. Here, because of the external mechanical force, permanent or temporary impairment can occur in the cognitive, physical, and psychosocial functions of the patient. Now we'll see about the etiology. The commonest etiological factor for head injury includes motor vehicle accidents, falls, assault, sports-related injuries, and fire-related injuries. Among the etiology, for the motor vehicle crashes, nearly 44% of victims they are developing this particular head injury because of motor vehicle crashes, and because of fall, 26% of victims they develop head injury. Other or unknown causes includes 13% due to assault. Nearly 9% of victims may land up into head injury, and because of fire, 8% of people they may develop head injury. Now we'll see about the incident rate. The highest incident rate we can be able to see among the adolescents or older people, especially age above 75. So among the adolescents or very old people, we can be able to see more incidents. 50% of major trauma deaths are due to trauma brain injury. Then vehicle crashes are the leading cause of brain injury. Falls are the second leading cause of death. I will switch over to the main anatomical structure where the injury can occur. Superficially, the head will be covered with a skin, otherwise called a scalp. Below, under that, we are having periosteum and three covering layers we are having: dura mater, arachnoid mater, and biameter. Dura mater is the outer layer, arachnoid mater is the middle layer, biameter is the innermost layer. So we are having three covering layers, otherwise called it as meninges. It was protected by a bone, periosteum, and superficially we are having a coverage with the skin. So depending upon the penetration, depending upon the severity, patient may land up into head injury at the level of skin, or at the level of periosteum, or at the level of bone, or at the level of dura mater, arachnoid mater, or biameter. Sometimes even it may, if the cause is so severe, even it may invade into very deep muscles of the brain tissues. Now we'll see about the different types of injury, head injury. Major classification includes scalp laceration, skull fracture, minor head injury, or major head trauma. These are the four major classification of head injury. I'll repeat: scalp laceration, skull fracture, minor head trauma, and finally major head trauma. First, we'll see about the scalp laceration. It's easily you can be able to recognize what type of problem they are having. The most minor type of head trauma, we can be able to see only laceration only. Since our scalp is having a high vascular supply, profuse bleeding we can be able to expect. Major complication is only infection only, because of the open area, sometimes microorganisms may invade into the bloodstream, because of the patient may develop some infection. So otherwise nothing will happen. Very easily you can be able to treat the condition. Only thing is they'll be having a very profuse bleeding since our scalp region has a high vascular supply. Next, we will switch over to the next type, that is called a skull fracture. This skull fracture can be again classified under four major heading: linear fracture, depressed fracture, comminuted fracture, and finally common fracture. These are all the four things which will come under skull fracture. Now we'll see one by one. First one is linear fracture. Any break in the continuity of the bone without any alteration of the relationship of the parts of the skull, that is called a skull fracture. Main cause for this type of fracture is low velocity injuries. Very minor velocity injury will make land up into linear skull fracture. Second type is called as depressed fracture. Here, invaded or indentation of the skull will be seen. Here, the picture you can be able to see. Then, in because of the powerful blow of any sharp or pointed object, patient may develop this sort of depressed fracture. This is the second type of skull fracture. Third type includes this comminuted fracture. Here, multiple linear fractures with fragmentation of bones into pieces we can be able to see. Here, the picture is shown here in the same linear fragmentation. That line will be there in the same line itself. Patient may develop fracture. And this is the third one. Fourth type is a complicated one. This is otherwise called as common fracture. So here, a depressed skull fracture and a scalp laceration communicating intracranial cavity. Here, the injury is more, so fragments of breakage, you can be able to see fragments of skull bone can be able to see here in case of common fracture. These are the four types of skull fracture. According to the location, you can categorize fracture under this frontal fracture, temporal fracture, parietal fracture, posterior fossa fracture, orbital fracture, and finally basilar skull fracture. So depending upon the location, you can categorize like this. First, we will see about the temporal bone fracture. Here, foggy temporal muscle, because of extravasation of the blood, you can be able to see, especially at the back of the ear. So here, oval shaped bluish behind the ear in the mastoid region, you can be able to see. It will look like a battle. Otherwise, this is called as battle sign. Because of this, because of temporal bone fracture, patient may develop otorrhea. That means some secretion, you can be able to see it from the ear. So that is called as otorrhea. Next, we switch over to the parietal bone fracture. Because of this parietal bone fracture, patient may develop deafness, CS otorrhea. CSF can be leaked through the ear. That is called a CSF otorrhea. Then bulging of tympanic membranes by blood or CSF. Because of blood or CSF, bulging tympanic membrane you can be able to see, and sometimes patient even may land up into facial paralysis. These are all the complications we can be able to expect in case of parietal bone fracture. Next, we switch over to orbital fracture. Here, because of fracture to the orbital area, that is around the eye, that is called as periorbital ecchymosis. In common thing, it looks like a raccoon eyes. This type of structure, you can be able to see it around the eyes. That is because of periorbital ecchymosis. Sometimes even a patient may land into optic nerve injury because of orbital fracture. Next, we'll switch over to the basilar skull fracture. When patient is having this sort of fracture, they may have otorrhea or rhinorrhea, leakage from the ear as well as leakage from the nose. You can be able to see bulging of tympanic membrane, Bartle's eye, or facial paralysis, tinnitus, and vertigo. These are all the complications we can be able to expect among the patient who is having basilar skull fracture. Next, when the patient is having any otorrhea or rhinorrhea because of leakage of blood or CSF, we won't be able to confirm what type of leakage it is. In case of any otorrhea or rhinorrhea, we supposed to check for any leakage of CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. We may check it out. There are two techniques you can be able to adopt. One simple method is collect the sample and check for presence of glucose, because the major component of CSF is glucose. So check it out. Dextrose strip, we have to check it out. So if blood is present in the fluid, the test becomes unreliable. So if it is very bloody, you won't be able to the test result is not reliable. You won't be able to predict whether patient is having a leakage of blood or CSF fluid. To confirm that, we can go with the second method. So here what is supposed to do is allow a leaking fluid to drip on a white pad or towel. Observe the drainage. Wait for some minutes, wait for a few minutes, so that what will happen, the blood will form a clot-like structure at the center. If the patient is having leakage of cerebrospinal fluid around this blood clot, they may have a yellowish discoloration. The deposition will be seen around the blood clot. Around that, you can be able to see yellow color deposition. This you can be able to observe it on the white pad or towel. So if they are having a blood clot at the center and around they are having any yellow discoloration, that shows patient is having discharge of CSF fluid. This way you can be able to confirm when the patient is complaining otorrhea or rhinorrhea. Next, we'll switch over to the third type of skull fracture, that is minor head trauma. So minor head trauma is, otherwise you can call it as concussion, a sudden transient mechanical head injury with the disruption of neural activity and a change in the level of conscious, that is called as concussion. It occurs when the brain suddenly shifts inside the skull and knocks against the skull bony surfaces. So brain will go and hit against the well-packed bony surface so that some agitation will create. So because of that, patient may land up into loss of consciousness. It will happen in case of any severe, very bold hit because of any sharp or pointed objects. This is the main causative factor for minor head trauma. So the typical sign of this particular issue is they'll be having a brief disruption of loss of consciousness. So concussion can last from a few moments to an unconscious state for over 3 minutes because all of a sudden they will lose their conscious level. It may last up to 3 minutes. So after the episode, they may have amnesia. And regarding that event, what was happened for them, they won't be able to reveal. So they'll be having a temporary or very short amnesia. And finally, they may even develop severe headache. So these are the typical sign. Next, we switch over to the major head trauma. Otherwise, this is called as contusion. Or here the contusion means it is the bruising of the brain tissue within a focal area. A particular area, they'll be having a major head trauma. It is usually associated with a closed head injury. This is the main causative factor for major head trauma. Here you can be able to see two types of fracture, that is called as scoop and countercoup. Countercoup is the commonest type of fracture you can be able to see. Now we'll see the difference between what is scoop fracture, what is countercoup fracture. In this type of injury, contusion occur both at the site of the direct impact of the brain on the skull, that is called a scoop injury, and at to the secondary area of damage on the opposite side away from the injured area, that is called as countercoup injury. So because of the hitting or any direct impact on the skull, if the fracture occurs on the same site, that is called a scoop injury. But in case of any direct, because of the direct impact will be at one side, but to the opposite side, patient, when the patient develops fracture, that is called as countercoup fracture. So depending upon the causative factor and the anatomical disformities, we can be able to confirm whether patient is having a coup injury or countercoup injury. Another type of major head trauma is laceration. It involves actual tearing of brain tissue and often occur in association with depressed open fractures and penetrating injuries like this. Here the penetration you can be able to see. So in case of any penetrating injury, patient may develop laceration. And we will see the complications of head injury, maybe because of laceration or skull fracture, minor injury or major injury. We can expect the following complications. The commonest thing is they may develop intracranial hemorrhage. So that intracranial hemorrhage can be categorized as extraaxial hemorrhage and intraaxial hemorrhage. That extraaxial hemorrhage again categorized under three major heading. One is epidural hematoma, subdural hematoma, subarachnoid hematoma. This subdural hematoma again can be categorized like acute subdural hematoma and chronic subdural hematoma. Then under the intraaxial hemorrhage, we can categorize that under two major heading. One is intraparenchymal hemorrhage, intraventricular hemorrhage. So depending upon the anatomical location, you can divide that into either intraparenchymal hemorrhage or intraventricular hemorrhage. We will see each and every type of intracranial hemorrhages because of head injury in detail. First thing is epidural hemorrhage or epidural hematoma. It's a neurological emergency. Most common type of intracranial hemorrhage is epidural hemorrhage only. So it results from bleeding between the dura and the inner surface of the skull. Blow to the temporal and parietal bone is the commonest reason for developing epidural hemorrhage. Commonly, bleeding by atrial origin break in the middle meningeal artery. Here, the commonest reason for developing epidural hemorrhage is breakage to the middle meningeal artery, and from the venous return here are the dural venous sinuses. From either to these are the two major areas. From there, you can be able to expect bleeding. So that will come under epidural hemorrhage. But it's a very, very highly neurological emergency situation. Immediate attention is very, very essential. When in case of any epidural hemorrhage, what are the clinical manifestations you can expect? I listed down now. The patient is initially, they'll become unconscious after the trauma. Soon after the trauma, they'll become unconscious. The patient then awakes and has a very lucid interval followed by a decrease in level of consciousness. and headache. Finally, even they may have nausea and vomiting. These are all the clinical manifestation you can be able to expect. And when you're taking a CT on head, CT, you can be able to see a clot-like structure, and that too, it will be looking a very biconvex, biconvex shaped, very clot. You can be able to see well-defined margin or border will be there for the clot. This is a special thing you can be able to see that too. That usually respect the cranial sutures line. So here, near the cranial sutures line, you can be able to see a well-defined border of the clot. That too, the shape will be looking at biconvex shape. This is the typical clinical manifestation you can be able to see in case of epidural hematoma. How we are going to manage epidural hematoma? Here, treatment of choice is craniotomy. So, a open craniotomy for evacuation of the heart clot, and homeostasis is indicated for epidural hematoma. So prevention of cerebral herniation is the utmost care you're supposed to give, so that you can be able to reduce the complications. So dramatically, if you want to have any improvement, we're supposed to take utmost care to avoid prevention, cerebral herniation. That's supposed to be avoided. So these are the management for epidural hematoma. Next is show to the subdural hematoma. This subdural hematoma occurs from bleeding between the dura mater and the arachnoid layer of the meninges. So between dura and the arachnoid meninges, this subdural hematoma can occur. This can be again classified into acute subdural hematoma, subacute subdural hematoma, chronic subdural hematoma. First, we will see the subdural hematoma. Subdural hematoma usually results from venous bleeding, usually from tearing of the bridging vein running from the cerebral cortex to the dural sinuses. This hematoma may be slow in progress. All of a sudden, it won't occur. The development will be very slow in process. In case it will take 24 to 48 hours after the severe head trauma. So commonly related to acceleration and deceleration injury. Then clinical manifestations are as same like elevated ICP. They'll be having severe headache, vomiting, nausea, then loss of consciousness or confusion. All these elevated ICP, the same clinical manifestation we can be able to see in case of acute subdural hematoma. The size of the hematoma determines the patient's clinical presentation. If the hematoma is so big, the clinical manifestation also will be so high. So depending upon the size, we can be able to predict the clinical manifestation. So decreasing level of conscious from drowsy and confused to unconscious. So it will initially they'll be having a drowsy look. Slowly they'll become confused. Finally they'll become unconscious, and they may have severe headache. Ipsilateral pupil dilatation also we can be able to see, and motor signs also they won't be able to make proper motor movements. Then when you are taking CT here on the head, when you're taking in case of acute subdural hemorrhage, the clot will be very bright and the mixed density, you can be able to see it here. And a crescent shape of clot you can be able to see. A lunate-like structure, maybe have a less distinct border. Here the border is not going to be very distinct. You won't be able to see a distinct border. When compared to epidural hematoma, we can be able to see a defined margin, but here the margin is not going to be that clear, but it will look like a lunate or crescent shape. So this way you can be able to make a difference between acute subdural hematoma and epidural hematoma. For the treatment of choice in case of acute subdural hematoma or hemorrhage, we can go with the craniotomy. For evacuation of the blood clot, and the decompression is very, very important. Otherwise, severe compression will occur upon the brain tissues. To avoid that, we can supposed to have the decompression. This decompression is indicated for any acute subdural hematoma if the size is 1 centimeter, more than 1 centimeter in thickness, or smaller hematomas that are any symptomatic, we can have this decompression process. So treatment of choice is going to be open craniotomy only. Then we'll switch over to the subacute subdural hematoma. Usually occurs within 2 to 14 days of the injury. The alteration in the mental status is as the hematoma develops, patient will be having alteration in the mental status. So progression depends on the size and the location of hematoma. Progression or improvement from the patient side depends upon the size of the hematoma and the location of the hematoma, but it is slow in progress. It will take 2 to 14 days to develop the hematoma. It will alter the mental status of the patient. Then we switch over to the chronic subdural hematoma. It develops over weeks or months after seemingly minor head injury. It's also a very slow in progress. The peak incidence of chronic subdural hematoma is will be seen among patients, those who are having age 50 to 60 or above 60. Clinical manifestation is progressive. They'll be having a progressive alteration in the level of consciousness. Only alteration will be there in the conscious state. Next, this is the major difference between epidural and subdural hematoma. We will see each and everything in detail. Here, hematoma, in case of epidural hematoma, the location will be seen between the skull and the dura mater. In case of subdural hematoma, the location is between the dura and the subarachnoid space. And involved blood vessels in case of epidural hematoma includes temporoparietal, middle meningeal artery, frontal anterior ethmoid artery, occipital level transverse artery or sigmoid sinuses, the vertex portion superior sagittal sinus. These are all the involved vessels. In case of subdural hematoma, bridging veins is involved here. In case of epidural hematoma, the commonest symptoms will be lucid interval followed by unconsciousness. They'll be very active and awake, and all of a sudden, slowly, they may even develop unconsciousness. But in case of subdural hematoma, gradually increasing headache, and finally they will land up into confusion. Then on CT, biconvex lens limited by suture line, you can be able to see in case of epidural hematoma. But in case of subdural hematoma, crescent-shaped cross, that suture lines we can be able to see. It will cross, that crescent-shaped thing will be crossing over the suture line. This way we can be able to differentiate epidural hematoma with the subdural hematoma. Next, we will switch over to the subarachnoid hemorrhage. So bleeding occurs between the arachnoid and bimater is called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. The commonest causes here rupture of berry-aneurysm or trauma. So what do you mean by berry-aneurysm? Means it occurs at the point at which cerebral artery departs from the circular artery at the base of the brain. That is called a rupture of berry-aneurysm. Another important cause for subarachnoid hemorrhage will be trauma. In case of any severe trauma, they may develop this sort of hemorrhage. In case of subarachnoid hemorrhage, we can see the following clinical features like explosive headache. Worst headache they will be experiencing, severe nausea and vomiting, signs of meningeal irritation, and decreased level of consciousness. Finally, even they may land up into coma. So these are all the clinical manifestation you can be able to expect when the patient is having subarachnoid hemorrhage. Then we will see in case of subarachnoid hemorrhage, when you are taking a CT, here you can be able to see a increased attenuation is seen in the CSF space over the cerebral hemisphere. Over the cerebral hemispheres, you can be able to see increased attenuation seen in the CSF spaces. Next, we'll discuss about the intracerebral hemorrhage. Intraaxial hemorrhage is hemorrhage that occurs within the brain tissue is called as intraaxial or intracerebral hemorrhage. The two major types of intracerebral hemorrhage includes intraparenchymal hemorrhage and intraventricular hemorrhage. This intraparenchymal hemorrhage or ICH is extending into the brain parenchyma, and the intraventricular hemorrhage extends into the ventricles of the brain. So these are the two different types of intracerebral hemorrhage. Next, we'll see about the causes. So causes for this intracerebral hemorrhage includes hypertensive vasculopathy. Nearly 70 to 80% of cases they'll be having this because of hypertensive vasculopathy only. They are developing intracerebral hemorrhage. Then another important causative factor is ruptured aneurysm, and due to trauma, 16% of patients they are having this particular hemorrhage. Then because of this cerebral hemorrhage, the commonest clinical manifestation what you can see among the patient includes rapidly progressive severe headache, building over several minutes. It may remain several minutes. They'll be having a rapidly progressive severe headache, often accompanied by focal neurological deficits, nausea, vomiting, decreased level of consciousness. These are all the clinical manifestation includes intracerebral hemorrhage. Now we'll switch over. These are all the different types of fractures and head injuries we have finished. Now we'll switch over to the diagnostic measures and treatment modality. First, initially we'll discuss about the diagnostic measures. So for the diagnosis, history collection and physical examination is a very, very important aspect we're supposed to cover. Next to that, it includes CT, MRI, then PET cell CT, X-ray, all these things we can be able to use. Under history collection, actually this history collection plays a vital role that will reveal many information. So to come to a proper diagnosis, this is very, very important. Under history collection, we have to include the certain points like mechanism of injury, loss of consciousness or amnesia, level of consciousness at scene and on transfer, evidence of any seizure episode, then history of vomiting, pre-existing medical conditions, if they have taken any medications like especially anticoagulants, prohibited drug intake or any alcohol intake. So these are all the questions, may at least all the basic information we're supposed to collect at the time of history collection. Then we switch over to the physical examination. So Glasgow Coma scale is very, very important. Under physical examination, first and predominant thing is Glasgow Coma scale. Next to that, pupil size and response supposed to be recorded. Then sign of skull fracture like bilateral periorbital edema or raccoon sign, battle sign, bluishing over the mastoid pauses, then cerebrospinal fluid, leakage through nose and ear, that is rhinorrhea and otorrhea, any hemoptysis and bleeding from the ear. All these things is supposed to check it out. Then full urological examination includes a tone, power, sensation, and reflexes. Everything supposed to be checked out under physical examination. Then CT is another important thing. So CT scan is considered the best diagnostic test to evaluate for cranial or cerebral trauma because it allows rapid diagnosis and intervention in the setting. The NICE, that is the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence, in short we'll call it as NICE, has published some guidelines for when to carry out a CT scan in a patient with head injury. It includes when the Glasgow Coma scale, the GCS scale is less than 13 at any point, then Glasgow Coma scale 13 or 14 or 2 hours after trauma, focal neurological deficit, suspected open, depressed or basal skull fracture, seizure, vomiting more than one episode, urgent CT scan is not for the above, but when the age is above 65, we have to take immediate CT. Coagulopathy, if they're having the issue of coagulopathy, especially when they're taking warfarin, dangerous mechanisms of injury, CT within 8 hours is very, very important. Antegrade amnesia more than 30 minutes. Immediately we're supposed to go for CT. Then an MRI scan is also, it will give a clear picture, and along with that even we can go with the cervical spine X-ray indicate to detect any cervical injury. Then transcranial Doppler also will help us to come to a proper diagnosis. Now we'll switch over to the management. In case of severe head injury, immediate care is very, very important, and so the patient is supposed to be treated in a neuro-intensive care unit. Then the patient should be positioned with the head up 30 degrees. It is important to ensure that the cervical immobilization collar does not obstruct venous return from the head. This is very, very important. See to it, be sure the venous return is not being obstructed. Then patient in traumatic coma is unable to protect their airway and is at risk for aspiration. So maintain a normocapnia, that is a normal airway, that is very, very important. Then circulation and cerebral perfusion pressure also supposed to be monitored and maintained. So hypotension and hypoxia as a major cause of secondary brain injury. To avoid that, we're supposed to be very, very careful. So monitor upon the BP and the blood oxygen saturation level. A systolic blood pressure less than 90 mm of mercury, worst outcome in traumatic coma. So check it out, have a monitor upon the BP. Cerebral perfusion pressure should be maintained at about 65 mm of mercury in severely head injured patients. Then control of intracranial pressure, to have a control over there. So position head up 30 degrees, avoid obstruction of venous drainage from head. Then sedation plus or minus with muscle relaxants, check it out. Try to maintain normal respiration, normocapnia. Then diuretics can be given. Seizure control, anti-seizure medication is supposed to give. Normothermia, the body temperature is supposed to be maintained. Barbiturates can be given. These are all the measures we can be able to adopt to have a control over the intracranial pressure. Then medication, what are the medication you can be supposed to give? Includes osmotic diuretics, anticonvulsants, barbiturates, and calcium channel blockers. Aspartic includes one common example is mannitol 25%. So 1.5 to 2 grams per kg IV can be infused over 30 to 60 minutes. Then anticonvulsant, commonest thing is Phenetrione. To prevent a seizure episode, we can give this anticonvulsant. The initial load dose supposed to be 10 to 15 milligram per kg. As a maintenance dose, we can give up to 100 milligrams. Barbiturates, phenobarbital, it will reduce the brain metabolic rate and helps reduce intracranial pressure. The usual dose can be 100 mg IV or 150 to 200 mg IM we can be able to give. Then we'll switch over to the medical management. No surgical intervention if collection is less than 10 ml. If it is above 10 ml, then we can go with the surgical management. The indication of surgical decompression includes the GCS score decreases by 2 or more points between the time of injury and the hospital evaluation. Then the patient presents with fixed and dilated pupil. The intracranial pressure, ICP, exceeds 20 mm of mercury. These are all the situation where we can go with the surgical decompression. Under surgical management, first type of treatment is bar hole. So putting a hole and try to evacuating the hematoma or hemorrhage, whatever it is, so opening into the cranium with a drill and try to removing the collected extra things, that is called as bar hole. Another thing is craniotomy. So bone flap is temporarily removed from the skull to access the brain so that we can ease decompression to avoid to have the decompression. We can go with the craniotomy. Another type is craniectomy. Here excision into the cranium to cut away a bone flap. Then another thing is cranioplasty, surgical repair of a defect or the deformity of the skull in case of any compound fracture of the skull. Then finally, we will switch over to the nursing management. Nursing management includes GCS score, urological examination, having a monitor upon the elevated ICP, that is intracranial pressure, and having monitor upon the CSF leakage. These are all the areas we supposed, as a nurses, we supposed to give utmost care. These are all the, now we switch over to the nursing diagnosis. So ineffective tissue perfusion related to interruption of CBF associated with cerebral hemorrhage and edema, acute pain related to trauma and cerebral edema, hypothermia related to increased metabolism and loss of cerebral integrative function secondary to possible hypothalamus injury, then impaired physical mobility related to decreased level of consciousness and treatment imposed, and mostly they'll be in the bed, they'll remain in the bed. So because of that, they'll be having impaired physical mobility. Then anxiety related to abrupt change in health status, hospital environment and uncertain future. And finally, risk for complications related to cerebral edema and hemorrhage. So these are all the possible nursing diagnoses we supposed to keep in your mind. So accordingly to the need, according to the condition, we can give nursing care for the patient. Under the preventive measure, prevent car and motorcycle accidents, two-wheeler safety helmets and seat belts, wearing seat belt and all is very, very important. Then under rehabilitation, ambulatory and home care is very, very important. Give utmost care for nutrition, bowel and bladder management, seizure disorder. In case of any episode of seizure, care supposed to be given. Family participation in health education.